It all started with whispers, quiet enough to sound harmless, but sharp enough to pierce through my career like a knife. In the beginning, I thought they were just office politics, the kind of petty jealousy that came with success. I had worked hard for years, built a reputation of discipline, trust, and results. I never imagined that the man I loved, my own husband, would become the one to believe the worst about me. I still remember the morning I walked into the office and felt the air change. People stopped talking when I entered, glances shifted away, and suddenly, every smile seemed rehearsed. I brushed it off at first, trying to focus on the presentation I had spent nights perfecting. But deep down, something felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. The first sign came in the form of a confidential email accidentally forwarded to me. My name was in it, along with words like breach of trust, inappropriate conduct, and company resources misuse. My hands trembled as I read, my heart sinking lower with every sentence. Someone was painting me as dishonest, disloyal, and manipulative. It was all lies, carefully crafted and timed. I looked around the office, trying to figure out who would do this to me, who would want me gone. But I didn't have to wonder for long. 2 days later, my husband, the CEO of the company, called me into his office. His tone was cold, formal, like I was just another employee. The warmth in his eyes, the affection in his voice, all gone. He slid a file across the desk toward me, avoiding my gaze. Inside were printed screenshots, edited messages, and falsified reports, all pointing fingers at me. I couldn't even breathe. My voice cracked as I said, "You actually believe this?" But he didn't answer. He just said, "You've disappointed me, and this company deserves better." Those words echoed in my ears like thunder. I wasn't just losing my job, I was losing my dignity, my marriage, my identity. For a long moment, I sat there in silence, watching him, trying to find some trace of the man who once promised to stand by me through everything. But all I saw was a stranger sitting across the table, a man more loyal to his image than to the truth. I wanted to scream, to throw the lies in his face, to tell him how much I had sacrificed for both him and the company. But I didn't. Instead, I stood up slowly, every step heavy with disbelief. I signed the termination letter with trembling hands and walked out of his office. The sound of the pen scratching against paper felt like the end of a chapter one never thought would close this way. The moment I stepped outside, the whispers grew louder. My colleagues looked at me with pity, some with judgment, a few with satisfaction. It was like walking through a crowd of vultures waiting for me to fall. I held my head high, even though my heart was breaking. I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me weak. I walked to my car, my heels clicking against the marble floor like the only rhythm I could control in that chaos. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by silence. The house that once felt like home was now a reminder of everything I had lost. His side of the bed was untouched, the scent of his cologne still lingering, mocking me. My mind replayed every moment, the late nights at work, the trust one had in him, the sacrifices I made so he could rise higher. And now I was the villain in a story I didn't even write. I went through every document, every message, every clue that could explain how this all happened. And then I saw it, the name of the person who started it all. A coworker I had once considered a friend, someone who had always envied my position, my relationship, and the respect I earned. She had twisted my words, manipulated records, and whispered poison into my husband's ear until he believed her lies over my truth. The realization broke something inside me. But in that pain, something else was born, a quiet, burning resolve. I promised myself that night I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let lies define me or destroy what I had built. They wanted me broken, but I would come back stronger, smarter, and unstoppable. Because if they thought firing me would end my story, they had no idea who I truly was. The betrayal didn't hit me all at once. It came in waves, subtle glances, quiet conversations, and the realization that the people I trusted most were weaving the web that would strangle me. I used to believe that loyalty and love could protect me, that my marriage and my hard work were shields against malice. But lies have a way of slipping through even the strongest armor. It wasn't just about being fired anymore. It was about understanding who wanted me gone and why. Every rumor, every twisted story had one thing in common. They all led back to the same person, the one I once called a friend. Her name still tastes bitter on my tongue. She was charming, ambitious, and skilled at pretending to care. I had mentored her, guided her through projects, even defended her when others doubted her abilities. She used to come to my home, sit at my table, laugh with me, and talk about her dreams. I never realized she was studying me, learning my weaknesses, my routines, and my place in both the company and my husband's life. I thought I was helping her climb, but all along, she was building a ladder to step over me. It started when she began working closely with my husband on executive projects. I didn't think much of it. I was proud of her growth. But slowly, her tone changed. She'd make comments in meetings that sounded harmless, but carried poison underneath. "I think she's overwhelmed," she'd say with a sympathetic smile. "Maybe she's too close to the clients emotionally." And he would nod, unaware of how each word she spoke chipped away at the foundation of trust we had built. Then came the small mistakes: files misplaced, numbers altered, emails sent with my name, but not by my hand. At first, I thought it was coincidence or a system glitch. But when it happened again and again, I began to see the pattern. She was crafting a story, one where I looked careless, dishonest, even dangerous to the company's integrity. And while she wove her lies, she made sure to play the part of the concerned colleague, whispering into my husband's ear that she only wanted to help me, that maybe I was struggling and needed time off. I can still picture that night vividly, the night I overheard them in his office. The door wasn't fully closed, and I stood outside, frozen, listening to my husband ask her if he was making the right decision by trusting her version of things. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, almost tender. "You have to protect your company," she said. "She's not the same anymore. Maybe she's hiding something." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just betrayal. It was manipulation at its finest. She had him wrapped around her finger, feeding him doubts while pretending to care for his well-being. I wanted to burst into the room, scream the truth, show him how blind he'd become. But something inside me told me to stay silent. I realized that shouting wouldn't save me, proof would. Emotion would make me look desperate, but evidence would expose her. I stepped away quietly, my mind already racing. I began retracing every email, every project, every conversation. The deeper I looked, the more I saw her fingerprints on everything that had gone wrong. She had used my trust, my mentorship, and even my marriage as tools to destroy me. It was painful to see how easily he had believed her. My husband, the man who had once called me his greatest strength, now saw me as his biggest threat. He didn't question the sudden inconsistencies or the absurd timing of the accusations. He saw what he was meant to see, a narrative carefully painted to make me the villain. That was her real talent. She didn't just lie. She built a believable world around her lies, one that made even the truth look suspicious. At the same time, I started noticing her growing confidence. The way she walked into meetings like she already owned the place, the way she would glance at me with that faint, victorious smile. She thought she had won. And maybe for a moment, she had. My husband had turned against me, my colleagues were whispering, and my career was hanging by a thread. But what she didn't understand was that betrayal doesn't break everyone. For some, it sharpens them. Every cruel look, every rumor, every deceitful act fueled something inside me, a quiet determination that burned hotter with each passing day. I started documenting everything: conversations, system logs, timestamps. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. She was too careful, too good at twisting things. I had to let her believe I was defeated, that her lies had destroyed me. I had to make her comfortable enough to slip. And while she basked in her false victory, I began laying the groundwork for my return. The deeper her betrayal cut, the clearer my path became. She had started a war she wasn't ready for, and though I was wounded, I was far from finished. The days that followed were the quietest of my life, but inside that silence lived a storm I could barely contain. Losing my job was one thing, but losing it because of lies spun by someone I once called family was unbearable. Every morning, I would wake up with the same thought looping in my mind: how could they do this to me? I stared at the ceiling, waiting for anger to replace the ache in my chest, but instead, there was only emptiness. I stopped answering calls, stopped checking messages. I didn't want pity or sympathy. I wanted truth, and I wanted justice. The world had painted me guilty without ever hearing my side, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream or vanish completely. My husband didn't reach out. Not once. No message, no call, not even a word of explanation. The man who used to text me good morning every day had now turned into a stranger hiding behind silence. I kept checking my phone, half hoping he would realize the mistake, half hating myself for still expecting him to. I replayed our last conversation over and over, his cold expression, his refusal to look at me as he told me I had let him down. Those words didn't just wound me. They echoed in every corner of my mind until I started doubting my own reality. Maybe I missed something, maybe I had been blind to the signs. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I had been betrayed, not because I failed, but because I trusted too much. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't show on your face. It hides in your silence, in the way your hands shake when you hold a coffee mug, in the way your breath catches when you hear someone mention his name. I carried that pain quietly. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't tell my friends because I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't tell my family because I didn't want them to see me broken. I just went through each day like a shadow of myself. But beneath that numbness, something else was beginning to form, something sharp and clear. I was done crying. I was done feeling sorry for myself. I wanted to know exactly what happened, who started it, and why he believed them so easily. It started small. I went back through old files, old emails, anything I could still access from my laptop. I began piecing together timelines, dates, approvals, changes in project data. It was exhausting, but it gave me purpose again. Every little inconsistency was a clue, and every clue was a piece of my stolen reputation waiting to be reclaimed. I realized that the lies against me weren't just about professional sabotage, they were personal. Someone wanted to erase me completely, both from his life and from the company I helped build from scratch. That realization hit hard, but it also lit a fire I hadn't felt in a long time. The hardest part was pretending I was okay. When people saw me in public, they thought I was moving on, but inside, I was replaying every betrayal, every conversation, every fake smile that had led me here. I remembered the way my husband's eyes used to soften when he looked at me, and how they had turned cold the day he believed those lies. That memory fueled me. It reminded me that love without trust is nothing but a fragile illusion. And I was done living in illusions. One night, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the person I had become, tired eyes, pale face, and a kind of quiet strength I didn't know I possessed. That was the moment I made my decision. I would stop waiting for someone to rescue me or clear my name. I would do it myself. The pain I felt would no longer break me, it would build me. The humiliation would no longer silence me, it would teach me how to speak with proof instead of emotion. The betrayal would no longer define me, it would shape me into someone who could never be fooled again. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, cleaned up, and put on one of my old work blazers, the one I wore on the day I had been promoted. It was symbolic, a reminder of who I used to be before all the lies. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You're not done yet." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. The quiet suffering had ended. I wasn't going to hide anymore. If they thought I would disappear, they were wrong. I was coming back, not with tears, but with evidence, with confidence, and with the kind of calm that only someone who has already lost everything can carry. The war they started would soon turn in my favor, and this time, I would be ready. I began my search for truth like someone walking through smoke, unable to see clearly, but knowing the fire was close. I had no power, no position, and no support from anyone inside the company. But what I did have was memory, and I used it like a weapon. I remembered every meeting, every file name, every late-night email that passed through my desk. I started tracing patterns, connecting details others would have ignored. It was slow, painful work, but with each discovery, the fog began to lift. What I uncovered made my stomach twist, The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. My husband hadn't just believed the lies, he had helped bury the truth. The more I read, the clearer it became that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. I found deleted communications that shouldn't have existed. Emails that had been rewritten, reports submitted under my name with edits made after hours, and security logs that showed someone accessing my accounts when I wasn't even in the building. I spent nights piecing everything together, surrounded by screenshots and printed files. It was like solving a puzzle where every piece revealed another scar. I saw her name over and over, attached to timestamps, approval chains, and email forwards. She had orchestrated it perfectly, feeding small details, twisting facts, and slowly building a case against me until it looked undeniable. The hardest part was seeing my husband's initials on approvals that confirmed her lies. He hadn't even questioned it. The man who once said he trusted my instincts more than his own had signed off on my termination without a second glance. That realization cut deeper than any accusation. I wanted to hate him, but a part of me still wanted him to see the truth. That inner conflict made it harder to breathe. One moment I was shaking with rage, the next I was holding my head in my hands, wondering if the person I loved had ever really known me at all. As I gathered proof, I began to see how fragile their empire really was. They had built everything on image, on reputation, on control. And for the first time, I saw cracks forming in that glossy surface. A supplier issue they had ignored, a financial report delayed, client trust starting to fade, small fractures, but enough to show that karma was already moving in silence. I didn't need to rush. I needed to be precise. I started documenting everything in a separate drive, hidden and encrypted. I knew that if they found out what I was doing too soon, they would destroy the evidence and make sure I never recovered. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one careless message, and it would all collapse. But there was something strangely empowering about it, like reclaiming pieces of myself one fact at a time. I could feel my confidence returning, quietly, steadily. I wasn't the broken woman they thought I was. I was learning how to use the same system they used to destroy me. I reached out to a few trusted contacts, people who owed me favors, people who had seen enough to know something wasn't right. They helped me verify what I found, and slowly, a full picture began to form. The turning point came when I got my hands on a financial audit that showed unauthorized bonuses issued to her under false project codes. My name had been used as a cover to justify those payments. That was the proof I needed. Not just of her deception, but of his negligence. My husband had been too distracted by pride to notice he was being played. The woman he trusted had been siphoning money under his nose, using my position as the perfect disguise. I printed everything, organized it in a folder, and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just evidence. It was freedom. For the first time in months, I felt in control again. I watched as his empire began to tremble, small whispers of audits, board members asking quiet questions, her nervous glances in public events. They could sense something shifting, but didn't know where it was coming from. I didn't confront them yet. I wanted to watch the cracks widen. The silence became my ally. Every rumor that spread, every misnumber in their reports was a sign that their lies were finally catching up to them. I waited, patient and calm, because I knew the day was coming when I would walk back into that office, not as the woman they fired, but as the one who held the truth that could destroy them both. The morning I decided to confront him, the sky felt heavy, as if the world itself knew something was about to break. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering every document, every email, every proof that showed how deep the deception ran. I wasn't nervous anymore. The fear had burned away long ago, replaced by a calm, cold clarity. I dressed in silence, wearing a white suit, the same color I had worn on our wedding day, only this time it meant something entirely different. Purity was no longer innocence, it was power. I walked into the company building without hesitation, every step echoing through the marble hallway like the rhythm of justice drawing near. The receptionist looked startled to see me. Whispers began again, just like the day I had been fired, but this time, they didn't sting. This time, every whisper was fuel. I went straight to the boardroom, where the directors were gathered for their monthly review. My husband sat at the head of the table, confident as always, his tone firm as he spoke about quarterly profits. When his eyes met mine, his expression froze. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I could see confusion flicker across his face, followed by discomfort, then irritation. He hadn't expected to see me again, not here, not like this. I placed the folder on the table in front of him, sliding it slowly until it rested beneath his hands. The sound of paper against wood was louder than any words I could have spoken. I said nothing at first. I just watched him. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, he broke the silence. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. "The truth," I replied, my voice calm but steady. "Everything you refuse to see." He opened the folder, flipping through the documents. I saw the color drain from his face as he read the forged reports, the altered logs, the unauthorized payments to her account. Each page was a mirror reflecting his mistakes. The directors leaned forward, whispering among themselves as the pieces started to fall into place. He tried to defend himself, to say it wasn't possible, but every protest only made him look more foolish. I stood there, composed, letting him feel the weight of what he had done. Then she walked in. Late, as usual, with that same confident smile she always wore. But when she saw me standing there, her face faltered. Her steps slowed, her eyes darted between me and the folder in his hands. She knew immediately what was inside. The lies she had spun so carefully were unraveling right before her eyes. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to accuse her. The evidence spoke for itself. I turned to the board and said simply, I was loyal to this company, and I was destroyed by deceit. I trusted my husband as my leader and my partner, and both roles failed. There was no anger in my tone, just truth, and that truth cut deeper than rage ever could. The directors questioned her one by one. Her answers crumbled. Every lie she told made the truth shine brighter. My husband sat there in silence, his pride collapsing with every passing minute. The man who once believed he held all the power was now a spectator in his own downfall. When she finally broke, admitting her actions, the room fell into a stunned quiet. I watched his face, disbelief, shame, and regret all tangled together. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. I could have stopped there. I could have walked away, satisfied with his humiliation. But I had one more thing to do. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, crisp, white, and final. I placed it gently beside the folder. This, I said, is for you. His eyes widened when he realized what it was. Divorce papers. Signed, sealed, ready. I wanted him to feel the full circle of betrayal, not just professionally, but personally. The same hand that had once signed my termination letter was now trembling over the document that would end our marriage. For a long moment, he said nothing. The room stayed silent, everyone watching the scene unfold with stunned faces. I could see the apology forming in his eyes, the guilt, the disbelief that I was truly done. But I didn't need his apology anymore. The woman who once needed his validation no longer existed. The woman standing before him was no longer a victim of his choices, she was the consequence of them. I picked up my bag, turned around, and walked out of that boardroom with the same steady pace I had walked in with. Behind me, I could hear the low murmur of the board members, the chaos beginning to unfold, the empire cracking under the weight of truth. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of silence behind me was enough to know that everything had changed. When I walked out of that boardroom, the world outside felt different. The same streets that once carried my shame now felt like open ground beneath my feet. The air was cooler, lighter, and every step I took away from that building carried years of pain with it. I wasn't just leaving a company or a marriage behind, I was leaving behind every version of myself that had ever been silenced, doubted, or betrayed. It was strange, the peace that came after the storm. For so long, I had lived with chaos inside me, with questions that had no answers. Now, there was stillness. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally stopped chasing validation from people who never deserved my loyalty. The days that followed were quiet but purposeful. I filed the necessary papers, tied up loose ends, and started rebuilding my life from scratch. It wasn't easy. There were nights I sat alone in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, wondering what came next. But even in that emptiness, there was freedom. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to play the role of the supportive wife, the perfect employee, or the woman holding her world together while it fell apart behind closed doors. I was finally allowed to just exist, and then to create something entirely my own. I started reaching out to old contacts, people who had once respected my work before the lies destroyed my name. Some hesitated at first, still unsure of what to believe, but the more they heard about what happened at the company, the more they realized the truth had been buried deep beneath my husband's pride and her manipulation. Slowly, doors began to open again. One small project turned into 2, then 5. I started consulting for firms that valued integrity over politics, and with every contract I signed, I felt a part of my old strength return. But it wasn't just about work. It was about reclaiming my identity, rebuilding the confidence they tried to strip away from me. I joined a group of women entrepreneurs, most of whom had stories of their own, stories of betrayal, of loss, of rebuilding. Their courage inspired me. It reminded me that pain can either destroy you or redefine you, and I had chosen the latter. With their support, I began forming an idea that had been growing quietly in my mind for months, a business built on honesty, empowerment, and second chances. I wanted to create a space where people could work without fear of being silenced, where integrity wasn't punished but celebrated. Starting from nothing was terrifying. There were moments I doubted myself, moments when I questioned whether I could do it alone. But each time fear crept in, I remembered the humiliation of being fired for something I didn't do, the coldness in his voice when he told me I had disappointed him. Those memories became my fuel. They reminded me of the strength I had when everything else was taken away. I poured that strength into my new venture, working late nights again, but this time, every hour felt worth it. It wasn't for him or for anyone else's approval. It was for me. Months passed, and word about my company started to spread. Clients came through recommendations, impressed by the results, surprised by how efficiently I worked with such a small team. It wasn't long before the company that had once fired me began losing contracts to mine. The irony was poetic. I didn't gloat or celebrate publicly. I didn't need to. My success was quiet but powerful, a message that didn't need to be spoken. It was visible in every achievement, every client email, every project that bore my name, clean, respected, untarnished. One morning, I received an email from a familiar address, his. My ex-husband wanted to meet to talk. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling neither anger nor longing. Just closure. I met him in a public cafe, not out of emotion, but out of curiosity. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The confident CEO I once knew had been replaced by a man carrying regret. He talked about how everything fell apart after I left, how the board had forced him to resign, how her betrayal had cost him his reputation. I listened quietly, without interruption. When he finally paused, I said only one thing: now you know what it feels like to lose everything you took for granted. There was no satisfaction in my voice, just truth. I wasn't there to hurt him. I had already moved beyond revenge. What I wanted was peace, and I had already found it. I left him sitting there, his eyes following me as I walked away for the last time. Outside, the sun was bright, the air alive. I thought about how far I had come from being labeled, humiliated, and discarded, to standing on my own, stronger than ever. My empire wasn't built from revenge. It was built from survival, from resilience, from knowing that the woman they tried to destroy had risen higher than they ever imagined she could.